So I'm a researcher and I'm interested in the interaction between life and its environment. I've been working in the Arctic for over a decade. So we're studying this process of microbes, kind of zombie microbes that have been sleeping for thousands of years being reactivated. What we're essentially trying to do is kind of discover new knowledge about how the world works. Climate change is causing glaciers to retreat, and as these glaciers are retreating, they're exposing kind of new bare ground that hasn't been sort of seen light for thousands of years. And we're studying the processes of what happens when the glaciers disappear. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the world. So climate change is about twice as strong during the wintertime than during the summer in the Arctic. We do work in polar bear land. Penguins are super funny and super silly. My job is to discover new knowledge about how the world works.
In today's Diary of a Future CEO, I'm joined by Dr. James Bradley, a scientist whose work quite literally spans the ends of the Earth. In the Bradley Lab, science meets the extremes, from the frozen glaciers to the deepest soils of the Antarctic. James, welcome. Can you tell me a bit more about some of the projects that you're working on at the moment?
So I'm a researcher and I'm interested in the interaction between life and its environment. So specifically microscopic organisms, so microorganisms, and how the Earth system shapes them and their evolution and their activity, but also how they interact with and shape the Earth system.
So what are some of these big questions that you're trying to answer with your research?
I work a lot in remote extreme environments. So how can microbes adapt to survive in extreme environments? But also how some of their processes are directly affecting Earth systems and Earth climate. So one quite well-known example is that the Earth system is warming from climate change, and permafrost in the Arctic, which is sort of permanently frozen ground, is thawing for the first time. And as this ground thaws, it stores a huge amount of carbon, and this carbon becomes sort of available to microorganisms that have been locked and frozen inside this ground for thousands or maybe millions of years. So as these microbes are seeing water for the first time in thousands of years, they're waking up and they're able to consume that organic carbon, and they breathe gases like carbon dioxide, or they produce carbon dioxide, they produce methane, and these gases can escape into the atmosphere and then warm the climate faster. So the initial trigger of warming then causes microbes to reactivate. So we're studying this process of microbes, kind of zombie microbes that have been sleeping for thousands of years being reactivated, and then consuming some of the material that's around them and producing gases that warm the climate further and then cause more permafrost to thaw. So it's kind of like a feedback cycle.
And what happens with the research once you've done it? What happens next?
I suppose there's a kind of a long process of what it is to do science and what happens with research. What we're essentially trying to do is kind of discover new knowledge about how the world works. So I suppose if you imagine like knowledge as a balloon that's expanding, what we're trying to do is kind of push the frontier of that balloon. So I suppose even finding the edge of that balloon is a difficult thing, because you kind of need to know what's known and then figure out what's beyond that. So what are the unknowns? What are the questions that need to be asked? Then we need to try to understand or figure out how to address those, and there might be reasons why they haven't been addressed before, because they could be technically very difficult. So once we've managed to be able to collect data and analyze that data that shows us what that new knowledge is, we write this in academic journal articles. So we would produce scientific papers that are published and read by the scientific community, but then we also try to sort of disseminate that knowledge to the public. It's, I suppose, for researchers, the job is mostly to advance knowledge in the sort of academic realm for other scientists and potentially policymakers to use, or private industry or anybody to use that knowledge. So we communicate that to other researchers, but then we also try, and some people more than others, to communicate that to the public.
What's been the most challenging element of your research so far for you?
Well, I guess you could talk in a few different things. So technically and scientifically trying to figure out ways to address new knowledge. Logistically, trying to manage projects and teams in remote parts of the world like Antarctica or Svalbard in the Arctic. But also, I suppose, personally, in trying to work and live within this kind of scientific realm where there's a lot of kind of things to realize about how science works and mindsets to try to strive towards in order to kind of almost survive in the sort of academic world of doing research.
You talked up there about some of the challenges personally. I imagine you're living in those really extreme conditions. I imagine you're cold a lot. I imagine that you're very isolated as well. But how do you cope as a person with those extreme environments and perhaps being so far away from life's luxuries?
Yeah, so I suppose going on an expedition to do research in a field setting is only kind of one part of what it is to be for me to be a researcher, because that's some of the work that I do. A lot of scientists spend their careers in the lab or on other types of work. But I suppose I've been working in the Arctic for over a decade, and in Antarctica, this will be my 5th deployment to Antarctica coming up. So I'm kind of used to it by now, but there's a lot of groundwork to do, especially when you're bringing new teams to the field. In terms of setting expectations and kind of communicating what things will be like, what a typical day might look like, what some of the if we've been out and we need to be staying out for a long time and carrying heavy stuff around. I mean, all of the sort of physical factors like the cold, if you have good equipment, you can deal with that. But sometimes, for example, we need to be collecting sterile samples, so using just sort of lab gloves without thick mitts on or anything, and filtering water or taking samples, and so you do get cold, you do get kind of freezing. But we're working in isolated, beautiful, often very stunning kind of mountainous or glaciated environments. Very isolated, but often with a team of people. And although we are kind of in this empty wilderness, we're quite, our living and working conditions are very close. So you're often like never alone, because you're sharing maybe a tent or maybe a dorm, and you're eating every meal together, and you're working all the way through the night. So you're isolated potentially from the rest of the world, but you've got a very kind of close interaction with the group or with the team that you're with.
Working so closely with other people, I imagine you really get to know each other well, but are there times when you just need your own space?
Yeah, and different people certainly feel that in different ways. I think for people to sort of thrive in these environments, it is about kind of managing expectations or setting expectations and communicating what things are going to be like, but also communicating when things are not okay for you. So I try to kind of stress to a group that I'm in the field with, people's personal feelings and safety and these sort of things are the most important thing. So if there are reasons why we can't be working out sort of away from the camp for a particular day, then those need to be communicated. If people don't feel well, don't feel good, then we need to manage that, and that all comes before the science. So we try to kind of make accommodations for that. Like the field campaigns might be longer to accommodate days where people might not be feeling great. We kind of manage everything according to people's ability to do the work.
I recognise that a lot of your work involves encouraging students, and perhaps students doing undergrads or PhDs, for example, who are interested in following a similar path to you. And you've done a lot to support and grow your team and give opportunities to others.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the job of a researcher when you are in my position, sort of directing research programs and trying to deliver research programs, is that a lot of the work is done by junior colleagues and sort of trainees. So PhD students and sometimes undergraduates and master's students who are working in the team are really critical in actually getting the work done. So I think there's a sort of natural, we want to be supporting them in order to be able to do their research, but kind of beyond that, I think it's really important to be able to create opportunities for a wider sort of range of people and ranges of experience to get into research and to do research. So things like doing an internship in the lab at a younger age before the PhD to gain experience and to see if it's something that they like, or just exposing them to that environment, I think is important.
When you're out there in these extreme environments and you can see the glaciers or just snow everywhere, is there just a time where you just, I don't know, stop and kind of think or wonder about the world? And I don't know, does it encourage you to self-reflect on how about your place in the big wide world?
You certainly can feel small amongst an enormous environment, especially when when the work involves sort of traveling through that environment. We might travel for several days over sort of completely empty landscapes. And if you look on a map, we might have covered a very tiny fraction of that, or we might be flying over Antarctica or flying over the Greenland ice sheet, and you go for so far. So you kind of can feel small in a huge landscape, but then the impacts of our being there and human activity on the planet are kind of everywhere. So even though we are in a very remote environment, the glaciers have been retreating, the ground is thawing, you see some of the impacts of human activity in these environments. And so there's definitely a sense of kind of not being so small that the impact of your presence isn't felt.
I saw that myself in Iceland a couple of years ago. We trekked up a glacier and we also went into one which we were told wouldn't be there in 70 years' time.
Yeah.
Just the impact of that, how it makes you think about your place in the world, but also what you're leaving behind for your future generations.
Yeah. And some of the research projects that I'm doing in the Arctic are very much connected to that. So climate change is causing glaciers to retreat, and as these glaciers are retreating, they're exposing kind of new bare ground that hasn't been sort of seen light for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years maybe. And we're studying the processes of what happens when the glaciers disappear and when you kind of replace the icy landscape with a sort of a new terrestrial landscape. So how do microorganisms colonize these environments? How do they sort of set up the it's not really soil, but sort of weathered rock for plants to then colonize? So yeah, all of the processes that we're studying in these polar environments, which are at the forefront of climate change, the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the world. They are all connected to this kind of climate change component in some way or another.
What is it most that you enjoy about your role now?
My job is to discover new knowledge about how the world works. So that's really fascinating. I can follow those interests in whichever direction I want to, so long as I'm able to find ways to do the work, to do the research. So that would involve, for example, having a track record in working towards those types of questions in order to bring in funding to actually carry out the work. But I can pursue knowledge and advanced knowledge in whichever direction I want. Often the people that are around me and the teams and my colleagues working close to me, but also in different institutions all across the world, are similarly driven and similarly kind of engaged. So they're really brilliant people to work with. You're exposed always to kind of new ideas, new ways of thinking, people from all different generations, so senior academics to sort of young master's students, and that'll be all the way through your career. So it's really a great sort of shared experience with many different people, all kind of driven by these similar kind of curiosities.
What would you say to a young person that's really fascinated by your work and really inspired to follow a similar path to you?
Doing research in academia is difficult, and it's kind of, there's a playbook to it. So if you want to have a research or academic research career, it's important to gain research experience in early stages. So for example, during your undergrad, trying to do research. So first of all, doing an undergraduate degree at a university which has research programs and being involved in those. And then reaching out to academics and asking them for opportunities research opportunities in their labs, trying to demonstrate that you have like a broad array of skills and experience in research. So that's like the first thing which I think is important, just to be able to get your foot in the door and be able to be kind of competitive. I think as you play the game of academic research a bit more and are kind of in the system, realizing that well, in academia there's a kind of a motto of rejection is the rule, because 95% of grant applications that you submit are rejected. Many of the publications that you send to journals for peer review and then publication are rejected. Most of the jobs that you'll apply for are rejected, and it's not because you fail, it's because there's not enough jobs. It's because the publishing agents are rejecting 95% of the papers that they receive. It's because the funding grantees aren't granting funding, they're rejecting funding applications. So kind of realizing that being in science and being in academia is about persisting and believing in your science and your idea and your work, and just realizing that sort of the system doesn't necessarily facilitate what would be considered to be sort of success or apparent success, but that you've just got to play within this system and try to persist and develop a thick skin and just keep trying.
And we need more funding for this kind of important work.
Getting funding to facilitate this work or to actually deliver this work is a huge challenge for academics and for researchers, and it's probably what we invest most of our time and energy doing, aside from sort of actually delivering that research. So yeah, I would say that increasing the funding that's available to researchers would make a massive difference in our ability to actually do the work in terms of advancing knowledge. Yeah.
Now, you've come very kindly to take part in our podcast today, but you're being deployed again tomorrow.
Yeah, so tomorrow I will fly from the UK to the Falkland Islands, or Islas Malvinas, with a stop in Ascension Island, which is a small island in the middle of the Atlantic, and then I'll board the new British icebreaker, the Sir David Attenborough, and we'll sail to Antarctica. So this is an interesting one for me, because I mean it's always brilliant to be in these polar environments, but this will be the first time that I'll be in Antarctica during the winter. So it's coming up towards summer here, but in Antarctica it'll be almost permanently dark, low temperatures. And one of the reasons why we're carrying out this mission in the winter is because in the winter in the polar regions we have very little data and understanding of what's happening, because it's difficult to work, there's no light, there's freezing temperatures, and it's kind of been assumed that all sort of biological processes kind of slow down and stop during the winter, but we haven't really been able to measure this. So this is one of the reasons that we're doing this campaign during the winter. Another is that the winter time is, especially in the Arctic, so sort of the opposite to where I'll be going, but we've been working a lot in the Arctic during the winter, is that the Arctic is in the winter the most susceptible to climate change. So climate change is about twice as strong during the winter time than during the summer in the Arctic, and the Arctic is already warming 4 times faster than the rest of the world. So if we want to understand some of the effects of climate change in the polar regions, we need to be looking sort of all year round.
That's going to be an amazing opportunity for you then. But if it's dark all the time, this might sound like a really obvious question, but how do you work? Like literally, do you just have lights on your, some sort of helmet?
Yeah, head torch.
Wow.
So in the Antarctic, on this expedition, I'll be on the icebreaker, and most of the work will be from the boat. So, you know, we will light our work areas, but a lot of the time working out in the Arctic, and we're from a research station, very isolated sort of cabin in the middle of the Arctic tundra. When it's dark out, and so it's permanently dark, and you can just see with your head torch maybe 30 or 50 meters ahead of you, that's much more challenging. And it's challenging because it's hard to do the work, it's hard to see what you're doing. It might be very windy, so everything's blowing around. It's very cold, so everything is sort of a bit more difficult in the cold. But there's also, there are polar bears, so it's very difficult to be able to know if there is a bear around and what we would need to do.
Have you ever had an encounter of face to face, James v the polar bear?
From some distance. So yeah, we do work in polar bear land, in polar bear territory. So it's a huge concern. It's something that we take a lot of effort to mitigate the risks about, but there are always risks. So the areas where we work, we will be in touch with other groups who are in these areas by radios, and so they can radio us and we can radio them if there has been a polar bear that's been sighted. We tend to choose our routes carefully so that we have good visibility over the terrain, and we might not go out if it's foggy, or if we don't have good visibility and we know that there could be a risk of running up close to a polar bear. As sort of last resorts, we carry a rifle, which would only be used to shoot the bear at very, very last resorts. But we have it's like a flare pistol, so it's like a small flare that throws a kind of explosive that makes a big bang, and the bear feels these vibrations in it. The idea is to scare the bear away if it's close to us, if it's kind of curious, and that would be, long before. Hopefully, we're in a situation where we would be in danger from a bear, or the bear would be in danger from us. So we've seen polar bears around, and we've had interactions, but nothing that's been anywhere close, fortunately, to something that's become serious. But because of lots of ways of kind of mitigating those risks and thinking about how to work in areas that have polar bears.
You've talked about some of the more academic elements of your work, but in terms of personally, with the type of person that you need to be to face these extreme environments and work in these kind of conditions, what kind of personal qualities do you think you need, or do you have, that's got you through this?
So I guess firstly, these environments tend to attract slightly like-minded people. So if you're working in a research station in a remote environment, people are there for a specific job. They're there to do research. So everyone is kind of motivated and excited to be there because of the work that they are committing to, and because of the work that interests them. And usually if you're researching something to do with sort of Earth systems and glaciers or these environments, you tend to be maybe, also quite happy to be out in these environments. So I think there's some sort of a selection of people who are already kind of well suited to being in these environments. So being tolerant of sort of physical conditions that might not be that comfortable, being sort of in awe and getting amazement and sort of joy out of sort of being in these wild natural landscapes, having a kind of positive mental attitude, a kind of understanding that we're at the mercy of the world and whatever is happening, but also a very hardworking attitude to kind of work through a lot of difficult conditions and keep going. But that's not to say that it's only these type of people and these people with these mindsets who should be able to work in these environments. So it would be awful if the only people that did work on polar regions were these people who've kind of had, the opportunity to be out in nature before, and the type of people that like going camping or climbing up a mountain. It should be really anyone who is curious about doing the research and enabling the research. So I don't want to just select students in my group who are kind of outdoorsy, mountaineering-y kind of people. So that's sometimes a challenge, but I think it's one that can be overcome, as to be able to make work in sort of remote, challenging polar environments accessible to people who would otherwise not want to be out camping, let's say, because if they're curious about the research, they should have opportunities to do the work, regardless of whether or not it entails and requires being in a remote field camp for 2 months at a time.
Completely relate to that, because I'm not a big camper myself, but I would find the opportunity to do even just the slightest thing that you're doing just so amazingly fascinating. The curiosity, I think, isn't it? Just discovering something unknown.
Yeah, so I think one important thing in doing that is the communication and managing expectations and sort of setting expectations. So if we understand, or if I understand from a student in my group what their experience is and what their expectations are, and then I can communicate sort of realistically what it'll be like to be in these environments, then we can kind of somehow meet in the middle and like find a way in which like they, even if they might not initially be very sort of stoked about going out to spend 2 months on a glacier in sort of freezing temperatures and darkness, a way to be able to make that happen so that they can do the research program that they want to do.
Tell me a bit about your role in France now with the university.
I started as a cher professeur junior, so it's a CNRS research, so that's the kind of national French research agency researcher position in January of 2024. And before that, I was a lecturer and then senior lecturer and reader in the UK. And before that, a postdoc. So I'd briefly go through sort of the academic track, which is that in general you would do your PhD, so your doctorate degree, and then in between sort of your PhD and a professor or junior professor position, you do postdoc, which is these kind of short-term research projects where you're the primary person who's kind of responsible for doing and delivering that research. And I did postdocs in Los Angeles, in the US, and in Germany, and then started a sort of academic job in the UK. I moved to France because of research opportunities there, because of I liked the way in which French labs are working and the attitudes that they have towards that, and lifestyle opportunities as well. So now I'm in Marseille at the Mediterranean Institute of Oceanography, sort of with my own research group, and directing my own research projects, but also working amongst a team of oceanographers and researchers to address kind of global challenges and advance knowledge about how the ocean interacts with different Earth systems, and yeah, just following kind of research pursuits.
Before we finish, we've talked for some more serious issues like climate change, for example, but I thought I might just ask you a couple of fun questions.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Penguins or polar bears? What's your favourite?
Penguins are super funny and super silly, so they're brilliant to see and observe, and they're not threatening. So that's it's always nice working in Antarctica, because you don't have this threat of animals in the environment that might attack you. But polar bears are incredibly impressive and just a bit mysterious, because we would only ever see them from a very long way away, but we have this curiosity of it would be great to see a polar bear. At the same time, it would be horrendous to see a polar bear, because it would require us to. So I think from a safe place, polar bear.
Polar bear?
Yeah, I think
really?
so.
Oh, I was choosing the penguins. And what's your one luxury item that you have to take away with you, if there is such a thing?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I bring any luxury item on any expedition with me. I like, just getting all of the equipment that we need together is enough of a nightmare. So a good team and good food. Good food is always good, but sometimes that's not possible.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
You must like fish.
Right? Yeah.
I can imagine there's lots of fish too.
Yeah, but we're there to work, and the work is physically exhausting and takes a huge amount of time. So anything that's kind of camp chores or the camp logistics, or just the aspects of like staying alive and living, tends to be sort of simplified in order to be able to maximize the time that we can work. So yeah, I mean, we're often working in fjords where there's marine life, but we haven't got time to go out fishing or to do any of that. It tends to be that when we arrive back from working on the ice at the field camp, it'll be late already. We'll have to continue to work to process the samples. So doing camp chores like cooking and organizing all of that sort of thing tends to be sort of we'll simplify all of that as much as we can.
Finally, we always ask our guests, what would you write in your diary today that you'd want to read in 10 years' time?
I don't know, create lots of opportunities to be able to find something that you are stoked or thrilled to spend your days doing, because yeah, spending your time is sort of precious, but is also what you experience all of the time. So I spent a year doing something completely different in sort of finance after my undergraduate degree because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I quickly realized that I wasn't really interested in that. So I'm glad that I then found and pursued an opportunity to do things that really do sort of fulfill my curiosity and what it is that I want to do with my life.
So basically, don't just follow the path that maybe you think you should follow, but one that truly is your own.
Yeah, or like put some effort into trying to find out what that is and take risks in order to get there, I suppose. So, you know, quitting jobs that you feel are maybe not really, if you have that luxury, that because that's not a luxury, obviously, that's available to everybody. But if it isn't available to you, and I suppose in a professional realm, then make sure that it is in your personal realm, I suppose, as well.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.